In the name of God, Creator, Pain-bearer, and Spirit of life. In this story we read this morning from Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, Jesus is a guest in the house of a senior Pharisee. It was again the Sabbath, and he was invited there for a meal. Now, it was obviously a formal occasion, sort of being, I suppose you could equate, sort of being invited to dinner at Bishop's Court for some special occasion when the other guests might include senior government and church officials. Nearest I've ever been to a situation like this is when, on very few occasions, I have to say, I dined in the members' dining room at Parliament House. I was grateful then for my parents' early instructions regarding proper use of cutlery and glassware, etc. Etiquette and social awareness come to the fore at times like these. Use the right knife and all of that. In this story, as Jesus is walking to the Pharisee's home, he is being closely watched, and obviously not in some adoring manner. He was being watched so that any misstep or word or action might become a base on which to build more criticism. That situation can be very uncomfortable for the person under intense scrutiny. In fact, for the average person, it can be a time when the underlying stress can bring about the very thing that the critics are waiting for. There can be no doubt that Jesus is well aware of this tension surrounding him as it is, but with his strength and power, he seems to be able to ignore it. You might recall a couple of weeks ago we read of Jesus curing a crippled woman. This event also took place on the Sabbath, and Jesus was roundly criticised, and an attempt was made to belittle him by a leader of the synagogue, you might recall. And he alleged that Jesus was breaking the laws concerning work on the Sabbath. Today, he's obviously in the company of a different leader of a different synagogue because he's been offered personal hospitality and invited to the man's home for a meal. It's interesting to read in the Gospels that not all Pharisees were antagonistic toward Jesus. Some, like this man, for instance, were apparently friendly and offered hospitality. Cynically, I suppose, one could surmise that they were just trying to discover more about the man and what he was on about. But I don't see any suggestion of that here. I think we're all familiar with the place name cards that indicate where each person should sit at a formal dinner. But this time there were no such guiding pointers. People seemed to sit wherever they liked. Well, it seems like it was first in, best dressed. And people being people tried to sit in the most important places, those closest to the host. So there was a hierarchy. It would be certainly embarrassing to sit down looking smug in an important position, then to have the host tell you in front of everyone else to move down to the bottom of the table. How embarrassing indeed. As Jesus says, much better to take the lowest seat and then be invited up to a higher place. So, we're here being taught a lesson in table manners, but it's much more than that, of course, much more. All of us have an ego. It's ingrained, it's part of who and what we are. Ego can be defined as an ethical theory that treats self-interest as the foundation of morality. Ego in Freud's psychoanalytic theory is that portion of the human personality which is experienced as the self or I, and is in contact with the external world through perception. That's Freud. It's said to be the part that remembers, evaluates, plans, and in other ways is responsive to and acts in the surrounding physical and social world. It's how one views oneself as an actor in the world. Egos, of course, come in varying sizes. They range from the small to the super large. The root causes of many of this world's current problems can be traced back to individual people who carry supersized egos. They view themselves as a colossus straddling the insignificant masses of humanity who are well beneath them. And forgetting that, in reality, they are no different from anyone else on this planet. This attitude is not that of Jesus, nor is it that taught by him. This little story amply illustrates that. So much for protocol at meals, and dare I say, life. Let's have another look at the scene. Obviously, there were more people present than could be invited into a small dinner in a Pharisee's house. So many might be thinking to themselves, "Oh, will I be invited?" This question is turned upside down by Jesus. Rather than, "It's all about me, will I be invited? Will I be included?" It's me. It's more than that. Jesus asked, "Whom do you invite?" The important people, those who might be able to bring you some benefit, the social set, the in crowd. Jesus is saying that if you are a Christian, not that that word was in use then, of course, if you follow Christ, his teachings and his life example, you will be known for your hospitality. Not for the grand banquets set out for the exclusive few, but for the least socially important and those who are seen as of no account at all. For Luke, Jesus subverts expectations. Once again, this subversive Jesus turns everything that we know on its head. Subverts social expectations and that social payment and repayment should govern life in God's kingdom community. Professor Janine Brown has asked the question, what might Luke 14 have to say to us? Well, there is a theological truth that undergirds this passage, and it's very tangible. Social networks and exhortations are addressed. As God's people humble themselves and seek to live by a different social system marked by radical inclusion. Radical inclusion. Again, that word radical comes in to these Gospels. Radical. And it is radical. They can trust God to be faithful and to reward their right ways of living in that final day. That's what is being said. This text speaks powerfully to the way in which the kingdom Jesus revealed subverts human social systems that so often reward the haves and rather disadvantage the have-nots. This is, of course, not just about meals, banquets, protocols and etiquette. It's much broader than that. This is about how we live our lives as Christians. We have to ask ourselves, do we honestly practice inclusivity? Is our first reaction to judge a person whose appearance, let's start again on that. Is our first reaction to judge a person whose appearance, speech, etc. is not up to our standards? Do we shy away from a person who is gay? These are the questions Jesus, via Luke, is asking us all, even in this 21st century. How do we answer him? That's up to each one of us, isn't it? It's a very personal thing. May the Lord be with you. Amen.